Chapter 023. Lighting the fuse. On the surface, getting saddled with Novelty seemed like a recipe for endless frustration and annoyance. She was an impatient, impulsive chatterbox that seemed to have no concept of personal space, always hovering uncomfortably near him and poking him with her front legs. Zorian was not afraid of spiders, but that kind of close physical contact was just too much. Basically, she was a spider version of Kiriel. And he only tolerated Kiriel's antics as much as he did because she was his little sister. Despite this, Zorian was actually glad to have met her. Her personality certainly left a lot to be desired, and he often had to keep her focused on their lessons instead of going off on weird tangents about various topics, but she was still a wealth of information on both psionics and Arania. And unlike the matriarch, whose every explanation sounded like a thinly veiled manipulation attempt to Zorian, Novelty didn't have a single deceptive bone in her body. Most of the time she said what she meant, and it was painfully obvious when she tried to shift the subject or fudge the truth. It was a refreshing change of pace from his previous interactions with the Arania. Novelty remained blissfully unaware of his thoughts, too engrossed in her inspection of Zorian's alchemy equipment. That was another difference between Novelty and the matriarch. Novelty couldn't read his surface thoughts unless he structured his thoughts very slowly and clearly aimed them at her. It made him much more relaxed about her presence than he would have otherwise been. Humans build so many strange things, Novelty declared after inspecting the glass vials by sight and touch. Zorian didn't know whether Arania were usually this fond of touching things and Novelty was simply unrestrained in her interactions with him, or if the spider in front of him was simply a physical sort of girl, but Novelty certainly liked to touch the things she was studying. Annoyingly, this included him as well as random inanimate objects, but at least she seemed to have finally internalized the idea he didn't like her climbing into his lap by now. "How did you even make this?" "It's the same kind of transparent rock you use for those window things, but I have no idea how you managed to carve it out in this kind of shape. And it's so smooth, too. I know those branching upper limbs of yours are better at manipulating things than our legs, but this is crazy. You know, the Arania once tried to keep human thralls to create things for us, but it was a huge hassle and it turned out it's much easier to just trade with humans for what we need. You humans don't seem to fare too well underground, and kidnapping humans always seemed to anger the rest of the human communities a lot, even when they weren't of the same clan or anything." Anne. That was a really long time ago and we totally don't do stuff like that anymore and you should forget everything I said about that, okay? Huh, said Zorian dubiously before deciding not to pursue the issue. For what it's worth, the transparent rock is called glass, and it's not really carved. It's made from sand, which is heated until it turns molten and therefore malleable and then shaped by sticking long tubes into the resulting molten mass and blowing air into it. Novelty turned around to focus all of her eyes on him. "How, in the name of grandmother's shriveled egg sack, did it occur to one of you to do that? Do humans have some sort of magical stone sense or something?" "No," said Zorian patiently. Explaining stuff like this to Novelty was annoying, but it made her much more willing to share things with him in turn, so he would labor on. "Humans have always been mucking around with tools of various sorts. We're pretty fragile in our natural forms, so building things is a matter of survival. We use crude tools to fashion better tools, and then those better tools to fashion more precise tools, and so on. I don't really know how glassblowing came into existence, but it didn't just magically pop into someone's head all out of a sudden. I don't really think you can be considered fragile," Novelty said dubiously. "You wield incredible magic, and you pretty much conquered the surface world with it." "Not all humans wield magic," said Zorian. "Only a small number of people are mages, and the number was even smaller the more you go back in time. Most of your tools sound a lot like magic to me, to be honest," Novelty said. "You take rocks and stuff and perform complicated rituals on them to turn them into these wondrous creations that no amount of web weaving can duplicate. It's the part that fascinates me most about you humans, this weird building magic of yours. I was kind of hoping I could learn some of your secrets while I teach you, but it looks like that will be pretty difficult because, you know, she waved her front legs in the air for emphasis, I haven't got these hands you humans use for everything. Not that I'm giving up or anything. I'm definitely going to figure something out. Well, you already told me you are learning to be a mage, so you could always resort to actual magic, said Zorian. Fabrication spells are a thing, after all. Granted, you'd have to understand the properties of materials you're working with and the engineering principles of the things you're trying to create, but if you're serious about being a crafter, that's pretty much a must anyway. I'll be honest and admit I have no idea what you just said, Novelty said after a brief silence. But I'm guessing you were trying to be encouraging, so thanks. Right, Zorian sighed. We've gone on a tangent again. Let's focus on the lessons again. But those lessons are so boring. Novelty complained. You already know most of this stuff, it's just a matter of practicing, and you can't do that here, anyway. You are practicing, right? Sure am, Zorian agreed. I spend most of my classes trying to sense my classmates and other students in the building. Not like I get anything else useful out of classes these days. It's going pretty well, but I still have to concentrate pretty heavily to achieve any kind of range. I've also tried sensing their emotions, but that is still pretty hit and miss. Are you sure no one is going to detect me doing that? Because I'm going to land in pretty hot water if somebody detects me messing with people's minds. I keep telling you, no one is going to detect anything without invading your mind first, Novelty assured him. I totally went and asked other Arania about that, since you keep asking about it, and they confirmed it. Basically, sensing minds and basic empathy doesn't involve any delving into other people's minds. I know you don't believe in the Great Web and all, but imagine a kind of mental plane that permeates everything. Minds create ripples on this mental plane, like stones thrown into a pool of stagnant water, and those who are open can use these ripples to locate other minds around them and divine some basic facts about them. Stuff like species and their general mood. Huh. That does make sense, Zorian said. So sensing minds and empathy are really two aspects of a single ability, that being an ability to perceive this mental plane of yours and interpret the ripples propagating through it? Do you know if mental shielding spells have an effect on this? Oh, definitively, confirmed Novelty. The basic shielding spells that mages like to use will pretty much ruin your ability to use empathy on them. Too much interference. Detecting them, on the other hand, becomes even easier. Any mind-affecting spells make a mind noisier to a psychic, even defensive ones. Especially defensive ones, now that I think of it. Well, except for that one infamous spell called Mind Blank that actually causes a mind to disconnect from the Great Web, making a person completely undetectable to mind sensing and utterly immune to mind-affecting magic. Pretty terrifying stuff, that. Zorian knew of the spell she was talking about. Mind Blank was well known as a kind of ultimate defense against mind magic, but the spell was infamous for causing psychological problems if miscast or used too extensively. A number of mages paranoid about people invading their minds had gone insane after leaving it permanently on, giving it a somewhat poor reputation among mages. There were other, less drastic protections that were sufficient in most cases. That's strange, Zorian said innocently. The matriarch told me that no flimsy human magic could shield me against her if she was determined to get me, but here you're telling me there is a spell I could learn to make myself completely immune to psychic powers. Well, you see, Novelty fumbled. She was actually right because those are totally different things, yes? A shield is one thing, we can totally batter it down or bypass it. If you take yourself off the Great Web, though, it's like you aren't there at all. You first need to sense a mind to connect to it, and if you can't connect to it. I get it, Zorian interrupted. No telepathic link, no Iranian mind magic. And you can't connect to something you can't sense telepathically. Clearly the creator of Mind Blank knew a thing or two about psychic powers. It sounds like the spell is designed specifically to defeat them. The idea isn't that revolutionary, Novelty grumbled. A sufficiently skilled psychic can disconnect from the great web with some effort. It's called going dark. It's a pretty shady skill, though, mostly used by assassins, thieves and saboteurs. Anyway, the problem isn't just the mind blank, it's the fact that any mage powerful enough to cast it is also powerful enough to take on the entire Iranian web all on their lonesome. We have ways of dealing with people like that, but I totally can't tell you because the others would have me dismembered if I said anything about it, since, you know, secret defenses and stuff. Right, Zorian said. He had no intention of creating problems at home for Novelty, so he wouldn't pursue that topic further. Their super-secret defense plans probably boiled down to collapse the entire tunnel on top of them anyway. So Mind Blank is a psychic skill translated into a spell. Not that surprising, I guess. Mages love taking abilities of magical creatures and turning them into spells for their own use. Really? Novelty asked. But I thought human magic is so good that there is nothing you can learn from others. The matriarch is always talking about how amazing your magic is and how no one can match it. No, that's completely wrong, Zorian said. Mages of Icosian tradition, which is virtually every mage you're going to encounter, are pretty much all about taking other people's magic and making it your own. The entire system of structured magic is specifically designed to be expanded upon as needed. It's true that we rarely find something worth learning among other magical traditions these days, but that's mostly because we already stole and traded for everything that was worth taking. That's not quite the story I was told, Novelty admitted. Don't feel too bad, most humans also think our entire magical tradition sprang fully formed in the early days of the Icosian Empire, Zorian said. But back to our conversation about mental defenses. You said an Arania could batter down or bypass defensive magic other than Mind Blank. Does that include you personally? Of course. Who do you take me for? Novelty protested. If I couldn't fight telepathically, I'd have been devoured while still at the hatchery. Zorian blinked. What, seriously? As in, actually get eaten or? No, not literally eaten. We haven't let the hatchlings eat each other ever since. Actually, let's not talk about that. It was just a figure of speech, that's the important bit. Anyway. Novelty hastened to change the subject. I don't know how it works among humans, but newborn Arania are confined to the hatchery during the first few months of their existence. There are usually a lot of us, and we're all cooped up in this tiny boring room with nothing to do but pester the caretakers for stories and pick fights amongst each other, and the caretakers don't like it when the hatchlings fight physically with each other. They are a lot more lenient about experimenting with our psychic powers, though. A bit of telepathic roughhousing is to be expected, so you pretty quickly learn the basics of defending your mind. Zorian tried to imagine the scenario Novelty just described and abandoned that train of thought with a shudder. He made a mental note to avoid being near Iranian hatcheries at all costs, just in case the issue ever popped up in the future. That's interesting, but not quite what I was asking. I asked about countering defenses, not defending yourself, he said finally. You can't win a fight by only defending, Novelty scoffed. I don't really understand this weird divide between mental attacks and defenses you insist on. Striking back is a crucial part of any worthwhile defense. Even a weak counterattack forces your opponent to spend some time and focus on their defenses and weakens their own attack. I guess I keep forgetting that psychic powers aren't discrete spells, but more of a manifold manifestation of a single holistic ability, Zorian admitted. Still, retaliation doesn't have to be mental, if I could stop your mental attacks long enough, I could just punch you or cast a spell on you to make you stop. Considering I know nothing about telepathic combat, that's probably the smartest option for me anyway. And that brings me to my proposition. I want to see how my magical defenses fare against your capabilities. I'm going to cast a few mind shields and you're going to do your best to take them apart. What do you say? Honored Matriarch gave me strict instructions about when I can progress with your lessons, Novelty said hesitantly. No doubt accompanied by strict instruction about what she wasn't allowed to teach him at all. Zorian was under no illusion that the Urania intended to teach him anything but a small fraction of their psychic skills. While the Urania seemed to worship their ability in some sense, and sought to encourage its spread among humanity, they clearly regarded most of it as a personal secret. Hell, some of the things the matriarch told him heavily implied they kept some things secret even from each other, never mind from outsiders. Not to mention it would be rather foolish of the matriarch to teach Zorian how to do some things, since he could promptly use those skills against her interests. For instance, he was quite sure that Novelty got strongly worded instructions not to tell him anything about memory manipulation, since that would allow him to mess around with the matriarch's memory packet and potentially feed her forged information. Still, Zorian was fine with that. He already got more out of the Urania than he thought he would have, and in case he ever got greedy for more than the matriarch was willing to provide? Well, there were more Urania than the ones beneath Cyoria, and Novelty made it clear they didn't really talk to each other much. If he traded for a single secret with 10 different groups, he could easily amass far more knowledge than any one group would be comfortable with him having. For additional irony, he might even trade them a secret he got from one of the other groups he traded with. It was a classical trick that Icosians used when dealing with tribal groups, and the time loop only made it easier. But if he ever wanted to do such a thing, he needed to have some way of defending his mind. He got the impression that Uranian tribes outside of Cyoria weren't nearly as friendly as the matriarch and her tribe, and mind effects transferred across restarts. The matriarch promised to teach him the basics of telepathic combat, which he translated as inadequate to threaten us, but good enough to ward off cranium rats and random mind mages, so he needed to know how human mind magic fared against your average Urania. We aren't progressing my lessons, because you're not going to teach me anything, Zorian insisted. It's just an experiment. I want to see how my spells fare against you. All right, I'm totally game, then. Novelty agreed, suddenly enthusiastic. But, you're not allowed to attack me physically in response, okay? That would kind of defeat the purpose of the experiment, agreed Zorian. Right. So are we assuming I'm attacking from an ambush or that I'm pressed for time? Novelty asked. The difference being? Well, if I was attacking from an ambush, I would try to simply bypass your shield entirely through superior skill. It's very effective when it works, but slow to set up, so it doesn't work if the target isn't either too busy with something to deal with me or unaware of the attempt. On the other hand, if time is of the essence, I'd just batter down the shields with brute force. It's faster but more mana expensive. Oh, and it's kind of hard to judge the exact amount of force needed to break through a defense without also damaging the mind it was defending, so… Let's just assume I'm attacking from ambush, okay? Yes, let's, Zorian deadpanned. The next hour was as frustrating as it was instructive. Novelty took the whole thing as a game, improving as time went on, despite Zorian's futile attempts to refine his defenses through repeated castings and spell combinations. It was rather embarrassing to see the overexcitable, scatterbrained Urania go through his spells like they didn't exist in 30 seconds flat. Granted, those 30 seconds would be enough for him to incinerate her in real life, but that presumed he was in a position to do so, and that might be an unwarranted assumption. What if she was hidden from him? What if she was behind some kind of wards? What if she wasn't the only attacker? But a little embarrassment was worth it. He now knew that his best defense against Urania and other psychics, he supposed, was actually the basic mind shield spell. Other, more sophisticated spells couldn't seem to cope against Novelty's telepathic attacks. Most of the spells you used were really easy to trick and bypass with a few feints and a bit of careful timing, Novelty explained. They were all based on simple defense patterns and always reacted the same to my attacks. That magic shell you used to surround your mind with, though, it's such a crude thing, but I have to admit it gave me trouble. No patterns or anything fancy, just a solid, unyielding mental barrier. I don't think I'd be able to bypass it at all if you hadn't kept messing up the spell every time you cast it. I was messing it up? Asked Zorian in surprise.
Yeah.
The shell had these minute imperfections in it that I used to slip past it. I don't think those were supposed to be there, Novelty said.
Minute
imperfections, she said. Sounded like a normal result of a usual spell boundary. Very few mages could cast a spell flawlessly, and they rarely needed to. Minute imperfections rarely mattered unless you were dealing with very special circumstances. Apparently this was one of those special circumstances. Zorian suppressed a sigh. He could already hear the ghostly voice of Svim in his head lecturing him about the failures of today's mages and the need to practice until you could do the spells right instead of good enough. In retrospect, he was just asking for trouble with that line of thought. When Zorian arrived at his weekly session with Svim, he fully expected to get an hour of his usual crap from Svim, which in this particular restart meant taking a bundle of thin sticks and trying to incinerate one of the sticks without singeing the rest of them or burning his hand in the process. Admittedly, Svim was staring at him pretty hard when he came in, but Svim did a lot of really weird things during their sessions. Zorian hadn't even taken a seat before Svim decided to speak to him. I have heard you have been casting fireballs, Svim said. Is that true? Zorian forcibly stopped himself from scowling at the man. Him making a comment like that was never a good sign. Svim was never impressed with anything Zorian did, so no doubt he found something objectionable in his combat practice with Taven. How the hell did the man even find out about that? Svim's face told him nothing, and Zorian had already tried to use his rudimentary empathy on him to no avail, trying to see what made the annoying man tick. Svim had an incredible control over his emotions, and virtually nothing fazed him or truly set him off. I can cast the spell, yes, Zorian said carefully, as if talking slower would help him evade whatever minefield Svim set up for him with his question. Admittedly only at minimum power, but dash. So that's a no, then, Svim deadpanned. He stared at him, as if challenging Zorian to contradict him. Fortunately, Zorian was far too wise to get worked up over Svim's proclamations at this point, so they simply stared at each other in silence for a few moments. Eventually, Svim broke the stare down with an overdramatic sigh. Mages these days, always rushing into things half-baked. I expected better from you. There is nothing wrong with being interested in combat magic, but immediately going for the flashiest, highest-rated spell in your reach is unwise. A half-powered fireball is no fireball at all. You should have concentrated on building a solid base until you could do it properly. Well, Zorian said calmly, why not show me how it's done, then? In response, Svim wordlessly drew a stack of cards from his drawer and threw them at him. Zorian instinctively caught them before they could collide with his head, too used to his antics to be surprised at the move. Cards, he asked, turning them over in his hands. They looked like regular playing cards, except their faces were replaced with squares, lines, circles, and other geometrical shapes. Cards, Svim confirmed. Specifically, cards made out of mana-absorbing material. The seemingly ornamental sigils on the corners expel any mana the cards gather, radiating it away into the surroundings. It takes a lot of mana to affect them in any way. And I'll be affecting them? Zorian guessed. You'll try, I'm sure, Svim said airily, pointedly rearranging the pens on his table instead of looking at Zorian. They're very hard to effect for mages of such meager skills as yours are. To make the story short, you'll be trying to burn the shapes painted on the cards, and only the shapes. You may begin when you feel ready. Zorian stared at the cards for a moment. He suspected he knew what the point of this exercise was. He had to use a lot of mana, and he had to use it instantly or the corner glyphs would simply radiate his mana away. That was pretty much the basic challenge of all combat magic: shape a lot of mana quickly without messing up the spell boundary too much. So he took a deep breath, picked a card that looked easiest to him, it was just a circle in the middle, how hard could that be, and poured a sizable chunk of mana into his first attempt. Other than the corner glyphs glowing a little, nothing happened. Damn it. This just might be a little harder than he thought it would be. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. After failing to affect the cards a few times and then overdoing it and burning down a few cards to cinders, singing his fingers in the process, Zorian finally managed to burn some blurry shapes that were clearly inspired by what was drawn on them instead of being an irregular hole burned through the center of the card. Predictably, Svim had some very disparaging things to say about that. Eventually, Zorian ran out of mana and had to stop. What kind of shaping exercise was so mana-intensive you can actually run out as you practice? The Svim kind, apparently. Instead of simply sending him away, though, Svim then proceeded to lecture him about the proper way of gathering ambient mana. Apparently there was a way to assimilate ambient mana faster if you sat completely still and focused on doing absolutely nothing else. So not very useful, all things considered, but probably crucial if he intended to complete Svim's newest exercise in any sort of reasonable time frame. Then, as a parting remark, Svim casually remarked that they were going to continue their lesson tomorrow. That tomorrow wasn't even a school day didn't bother Svim in the slightest. Good, Svim concluded. We have a whole day, then. We will need the time from what I saw today. It wasn't an isolated occurrence. From that day on, Svim insisted on practice sessions every single day, monopolizing every bit of free time Zorian had. Why did Svim suddenly decide to do that, when he usually never interacted with him outside their assigned meeting times? Hell if Zorian knew. It was certainly annoying, though. The Arania, on the other hand, had their own frustrations. Trying to track down the ward breaker that hired Taven's group to recover the watch turned out to be fairly easy, but getting access to him was anything but. In addition to being good at breaking and analyzing wards, the man was also good at building them, and he was a very capable mage to boot. The Arania lost 2 of their members trying to corner him and eventually gave up on him for that particular restart, focusing on other leads for the moment. They still did their best to counter the invaders during the summer festival, of course. The next 2 restarts were much the same. The Arania gathered information about the invaders, sometimes asking Zorian to speak for them if they had to interact with someone openly, and started a limited assassination campaign among the cultists and other invasion collaborators that they managed to identify. Zorian learned combat magic, Arania mind arts, and tried to survive Svim's lessons without punching the man in the face. Their efforts were steadily bearing fruit, with the invasion going more and more haywire with each subsequent restart, and the matriarch hoped their mysterious third time traveler was going to show up soon. The biggest surprise, to Zorian, was that Novelty actually remembered their interactions in previous restarts. Apparently the matriarch wasn't monopolizing the memory transfer like Zorian thought she would, and was instead giving him memories of 6 different Aranias in that memory packet of hers. Novelty, being something of Zorian's personal trainer by now, was deemed important enough to be included in that elite company, something the young spider was very smug about. Now, though, Zorian was feeling it was time for a change of pace. 2 restarts full of Svim were enough for him, and Taven had taught him most of what she knew about combat magic anyway. He knocked on the door to Ilsa's office and waited for her to invite him in. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Good morning, Mr. Kaczynski, Ilsa said with a hint of amusement. I haven't been expecting you until Friday. I suppose you've heard some stories about your mentor, then? No, I already know what kind of person Svim is. It's not why I'm here, Zorian said. No, I'm here because I want to learn how to teleport. Ilsa blinked in surprise. That's quite ambitious. Leaving aside the question as to why I should spend my time teaching you that, what makes you think you're even capable of casting such a spell? Even the simplest of teleport spells are very difficult. A fair question, Zorian admitted. How about a demonstration? By all means, Ilsa laughed, motioning him to go ahead. Zorian didn't need empathy to see she didn't think he was capable of impressing her. Well then, challenge accepted. Every difficult shaping exercise, every complicated spell he learned over the past 2 years in the time loop, he showcased all of them. Every written test or theoretical question she fielded against him he countered with a perfect answer, sometimes because he honestly knew the topic, and sometimes because she tended to ask the same questions each time he tried to impress her. And then, when she was still reeling from the realization that he was skilled enough to graduate from the academy right at that moment if he wanted, he pulled out several magic objects from his backpack and started explaining his spell formula experiments to her. While not an official spell formula teacher, Zorian knew from previous restarts that she had very good knowledge of the field, and could appreciate the difficulty of feats he was showing her. I'm surprised you haven't applied for a transfer to a Tier 1 group with these kinds of skills, Ilsa remarked when he was finally done. Yes, the Tier 1 groups, the Academy's answer to students too advanced for the normal curriculum. Sadly, the prestige of belonging to one of those groups meant that many people did everything in their power to place their child into one of them, and that meant the actual lessons couldn't be that much more advanced from normal ones, else all the people who bought or otherwise arranged for their presence there couldn't keep up. Zorian had heard all sorts of things about those groups, good or bad, but the general picture seemed to be of a bunch of social climbers looking down on everyone else. Nothing that Zorian wanted to be a part of. I believe I can get more things done through independent study, Zorian said. If I truly thought my classes had nothing to offer me I would just test out. Don't be too hasty, Ilsa warned. I'm sure you can find the academy resources useful for another year or so. You aren't that advanced. The academy didn't like it when people tested out. They publicly prided themselves on being able to help even adult mages, never mind gifted children. Graduating early implied that the student had nothing left to learn from the academy, and was considered a bit of a slap to the face on behalf of the student. You didn't get any money back for finishing early either. All in all, Zorian didn't really intend to test out, that wouldn't get him anything except create bad blood between him and the academy. Still, he always found that sprinkling some light threats into negotiations helped the other side take him more seriously. Ilsa continued to think in silence for a while, rhythmically tapping her pencil on top of a folder full of written tests that Zorian had speedily filled out earlier in the meeting. Zorian didn't interrupt her, although he considered the long silence a bad sign. In all likelihood this attempt was a waste and he would have to try another approach in the next resta. All right, here is my offer, Ilsa said suddenly. I will transfer your mentorship from Svim to myself. I will give you instruction in advanced aspects of illusionism, alteration, animation, and conjuration. If you impress me with your dedication, I will then include lesser dimensionalism spells in that list, and if you prove yourself adept at those, then I will teach you the basic teleport spell. Zorian blinked. What? That was way more than he asked for. Not that he was complaining, but... That sounded better than I hoped for, Zorian said. What's the catch? Well, first of all, I'm expecting you to be my personal assistant, Ilsa said. I've been trying to get one for the past 2 years, but the headmaster refuses to pay for their salary and finding a skilled person willing to work for free is surprisingly difficult. Anyway, you'll mostly be dealing with the large number of tests and homework I get every single day, and I may also ask you to take over some of my teaching duties to first-year classes. Or any other random task I think of that I consider below me, really. Annoying, but a fair price for what she was offering. In fact, this whole thing sounded remarkably like. And you'll officially become my apprentice, Ilsa continued. If I am going to teach you advanced magic and trust you with my work, I want to have some kind of legal hold over you. Like that. Normally Zorian would be very leery of signing an apprentice contract with someone he barely knew, considering their main purpose was to screw the apprentice over if they went against their agreement with their mentor, but this contract was only going to last until the end of the restart, so what the hell? Oh, and you'll be taking over the position of class representative for your group, Ilsa suddenly .c//om. Zorian winced. Not only was that a thankless, horrible job, it was also already taken. Akoja is going to be devastated, Zorian mumbled. He felt kind of bad at stealing her position, especially since he didn't actually want it in the first place, but there was no way he was missing this chance. Ilsa laughed. Zorian, the reason I'm giving you the position is that Akoja doesn't want it anymore. She says she hates the position, that everyone shuns her because of it and that I should give it to someone else. Unfortunately, I haven't received any offers to switch with her. Not from anyone I trust, anyway. She gave Zorian a knowing look. You were one of the people she recommended for the position, but I didn't even bother asking you about it. Everything I heard about you suggested you wouldn't accept the position. And you were absolutely right, Zorian agreed, still in a little shock. Akoja didn't want to be the class representative? But the girl lived for that stuff. And anyway, if she didn't want to do it, then why did she perform it with such dedication? If Zorian was stuck in a job he hated, he would do as little as possible, or even mess up deliberately so Ilsa would feel pressure to replace him as soon as possible. Why couldn't Akoja do the same? The only reason I'm accepting this now is because your offer is so good. So we have a deal, then? Ilsa asked for confirmation. Yes, but I have a question and a demand, said Zorian. First, why do you want to teach me those particular subjects? And second, I want to learn the teleport spell before the summer festival. I somehow doubt you'll manage to master the prerequisites for the teleportation spell in little less than a month, Ilsa said. But in the highly theoretical case you actually do so, I have no problem fulfilling your demand. Why are you so dead set about that spell? It's a bit of a dream of mine to be able to do that, Zorian shrugged. In my mind, teleportation has always been one of the examples of what a proper mage can do, should be capable of. Interesting. Out of curiosity, what are the rest of the things a proper mage can do? Asked Ilsa. Make a force field, create a magic item, produce a fireball, repair broken objects and turn invisible, Zorian said. I can already do the first 4, and the 5th one is illegal without special permits. He was already working on acquiring an invisibility spell anyway, but she didn't have to know that. Ilsa gave him a knowing look and Zorian would have been afraid she was reading his thoughts if he weren't sure he could detect any casual intrusion into his own mind. To answer your first question, I chose those disciplines because they're my own specialty, Ilsa said. It is only proper for an apprentice to learn his master's specialty, is it not? Sure, Zorian agreed. I'm not sure what all of those things have in common though. Aren't specialties supposed to be more focused? Well, when I was a young mage, I too had a bit of a dream, Ilsa said. Specifically, I wanted to master true conjuration. Zorian blinked. As in, creation of real matter out of thin air? Isn't that a myth? That's the current Academy stance, yes, Ilsa agreed. Pre-cataclysm sources claimed that powerful mages could manage the feat, but all the spells to do so have been lost and no one has been able to recreate them in modern times. Many mages think they never existed and the old records are making things up or describing something other than actual matter creation. Anyway, as a young mage, it had been my dream to recreate those spells, so I studied anything I thought could be a path towards that goal. Modern conjuration basically involves making solid illusions, so it was somewhat natural to start with illusionism and then progress to conjuration. And then, since true conjuration involves working with real matter, I moved on to alteration spells dealing with fabrication of items. And, did you have any success? Asked Zorian curiously. Depends on your definition of success, Ilsa shrugged. My ultimate goal was to design a spell that would summon material from somewhere else, without the caster having to know exactly where the materials are coming from. That was how I imagined ancient Icosians could fake matter creation. I sort of succeeded, but the spell I made only works in a specially prepared room and the mana cost of the spell varies wildly from casting to casting, depending on what I'm trying to conjure. And there was that embarrassing incident with the gold creation part of the experiment swiping these ancient coins from a nearby museum. She shook her head. A story for another time. I have to get to class soon, anyway. I'll prepare an apprentice contract for you to sign tomorrow, so be sure to drop by when you get the time. The next 5 restarts were both hectic and boring. Hectic in that there was always something that needed to be done, and boring in the sense that little of it was truly novel. He steadily improved his various skills, the Arania were getting highly adept at countering the invaders in various ways, and Zack seemed to have finally accepted that something highly unusual was going on in the background, and it wasn't caused by him. There was little chance of Zack identifying Zorian as the cause of the changes, since the sheer magnitude of them tended to drown out everything Zorian personally did. The Arania always started each restart very aggressively, giving anonymous tips to Scioria's police department, assassinating a few people, and even spreading a few rumors around. The result was that by the time Zorian entered his first class, the changes had already propagated throughout the whole city, academy teachers and students included. Zack didn't appear to suspect Zorian as the ultimate cause, or any other classmate for that matter. Zorian was starting to agree with Zack in that regard. Whoever the third time traveler was, he certainly wasn't in their class. Zorian had, through various excuses, talked to all of them. It helped that he spent the past 5 restarts as the new class representative, so he had plenty of excuses for such, using his slowly improving empathy to see whether they reacted with shock or surprise when he dropped some of the more suggestive sentences that would only make sense to a time-looping person. He found nothing to implicate any of them. All in all, things were going pretty well in Zorian's opinion. The last restart was especially good as far as Zorian was concerned. He had finally managed to learn the teleport spell from Ilsa. Zack was actually starting to get smart about countering the invaders instead of simply trying to take them all on through his combat skills, and the last invasion attempt failed to conquer the main academy building or the student shelters because the Arania somehow managed to influence academy leadership into adjusting their warding scheme. But the matriarch was getting impatient. Something was making her more and more nervous with each passing restart, and she refused to tell him what, giving flimsy excuses every time he asked. She seemed to be focusing most of her energies on some kind of personal project, which she described as information gathering and following a hunch, and whatever results she was getting were clearly disturbing her. Zorian strongly suspected she had discovered some kind of vital information about the nature of the time loop, and she refused to share it with him for whatever reason. He was honestly kind of bitter about that. What could possibly be more disturbing than what they already knew about the phenomenon? Regardless, the matriarch was insistent that the third time traveler had to be found, and the sooner the better. Once Zorian confirmed that they weren't in his class, she became convinced they, like Zack, weren't even present in the city most of the time. In all likelihood they simply gave critical information to the invaders at the start of the restart and then went to do their own thing. If they wanted to get their attention, the invasion would probably have to be a spectacular flop. Accordingly, the matriarch laid out her plan for the next restart, one that would definitely be impossible to ignore. Chapter 024. Smoke and Mirrors. Zorian would be the first to admit he wasn't the easiest person to get along with. He was unsociable, irritable, and tended to assume the worst of people. He had always known that, even before he had died and gotten stuck in a mysterious time loop, but he had also always felt he was justified in his behavior. Indeed, if anyone had been foolish enough to criticize him about it before the time loop, he would have reacted with all the subtlety and grace of a disturbed rattlesnake. Now, well, he still felt he had good reasons to behave the way he did, and he wasn't going to win any friendliness contests anytime soon, but the time loop had changed him. Made him calmer, and perhaps a tad bit more considerate to people around him. He hadn't had an argument with his family in years, his financial independence was all but ensured once the time loop was over, his growing magical prowess had done wonders for his confidence, and the sheer scale of his current problem made all his previous frustrations seem rather petty in comparison. Thus, when Kiriel kicked him in the knee for the third time in as many minutes, he pointedly didn't snap at her. He didn't even sigh in exasperation. He just continued staring out of the window, watching the fields fly by as the train sped ever closer towards Corsa. "I'm bored," Kiriel complained. Zorian gave her a curious look. While the wards protecting the train disrupted mana shaping, they had only a rudimentary effect on his empathy, and what he was detecting from Kiriel wasn't boredom, it was a mix of excitement, anticipation and apprehension. As far as Zorian could tell, such complex mixtures of emotions appeared to be the most common emotion that people experienced, and they were almost entirely indecipherable at Zorian's current level of skill. "What's really bothering you?" he tried. Her mind immediately burst into a flurry of activity, and she opened her mouth to say something before losing her courage and lamely disguising her attempt to speak as a particularly deep breath. So she wasn't just being restless. "Nothin'," she muttered, averting her gaze and despondently picking at the hem of her blouse. Zorian rolled his eyes and kicked her lightly in the knee. Despite doing the exact same thing to him only few moments ago, she proceeded to send him a nasty glare. Unsurprisingly, her attempt at intimidation failed utterly, she was about as frightening as an angry kitten. "Tell me," he insisted. She gave him a long, suspicious look before relenting. "Will you teach me some magic when we get to Cyoria?" she asked hopefully. How troublesome. The smart, reasonable response would be no, there was no way she would get anywhere in a mere month, this particular restart was going to be extremely busy as it was, and she was going to forget everything she learned at the end of the month anyway. "I'll see what I can do," Zorian said after a few seconds of tense silence. Well, tense for Kiriel, he was pretty sure she literally stopped breathing while she was waiting for an answer.
"Yes!"
she crowed, pumping her fists in the air in triumph. "But in exchange, I'll want your help with something," he added. "Fine," she immediately agreed, not even asking what exactly he had in mind. "Hey, can you dash?" "No," Zorian immediately said. "The train is warded to disrupt mana shaping. No one can cast spells in here." "Oh," Kiriel deflated. Truthfully, Zorian was bending the truth a little. The ward on the train that disrupted mana shaping was very weak and rudimentary, meant to deter overeager students and casual vandalism, and was little more than an annoyance to a proper mage like Zorian was. He could overpower the ward with ease, but he had analyzed it in detail during the previous restart and knew it reported any significant spell casting to some remote location. He'd rather not get chucked out of the train before reaching Cyoria just because Kiriel wanted a free show. Kiriel opened her mouth to say something else but was promptly interrupted by a sharp crackling sound that heralded the voice of the station announcer. "Now stopping in Corsa," a disembodied voice echoed. "I repeat, now stopping in Corsa." "Thank you." Well, at least Kiriel would soon get someone else to bother in their compartment. "So many people," Kiri remarked, watching the throng at the train station through the window. I didn't know there were so many people going to that school of yours. Zorian, who was amusing himself by trying to count the number of people on the train station using his mind sense, made an absent-minded sound of agreement. While he was no longer totally oblivious to the world while using his mind sense, it still took most of his attention to get anything useful out of it. After half a minute of trying to separate the tightly packed mass of people into discrete individuals that could be counted, however, he decided the task was beyond him at his current level of skill and refocused back of Kiriel. Why are mages so rare if there are so many people studying to become one? She asked. They aren't terribly rare, Zorian said. It's just that most mages coming from rural areas don't stay there once they finish their studies. I totally understand them too. I know I have no intention of coming back to Siren when I graduate. What? Why? Kiriel protested. Zorian raised his eyebrow at her. Do I really have to answer that question? Kiriel huffed and crossed her arms over her chest in obvious annoyance. I guess not. But that means I'll be all alone with mother and father then. That sucks. Just pester mother to let you visit me often, Zorian shrugged. She'll cave in eventually, especially since you'll be the only means through which they can maintain contact with me. Father doesn't care about either of us, so he'll follow mother's lead on this. Kiriel gave him a weird look. I can come and visit you? Anytime you want, Zorian confirmed. You don't think I'm annoying? She asked.
Oh no.
You're definitely annoying, Zorian said, smiling at her mutinous expression. But you're still the only part of our family I actually like. And I bet you find me annoying too. Damn right, Kiriel huffed, kicking him in the knee again for good measure. They watched in silence as people boarded the train and sought out empty compartments for themselves and their groups. But soon enough such empty compartments dwindled in number and their compartment soon got additional passengers, Ibri, Bjorn, and 2 other girls he never met up until this restart. That was a bit unexpected, he really only expected Ibri to be there. But no matter, maybe it was better this way. The more audience he had for this, the better. Now all he needed was an opening. He didn't have to wait long. Well, your brother is far better than mine, one of the new girls said to Kiriel after his sister was done explaining who she was and why she was going to Cyoria. I'm pretty sure mine would have done just about anything in order to avoid taking his little sister along with him. I almost decided not to bring her, what with the whole Cult of the World Dragon incident, Zorian interjected. But then I figured they're probably just a bunch of crazy idiots anyway. I mean, if it was so easy to summon an army of demons, all of Altazia would have been a burning wreck by now, wouldn't it? All conversation stopped as everyone turns to stare at him like he had grown another head. Zorian feigned confusion and gave them all a blank look. What? He asked finally. What exactly are you talking about? Bjorn asked carefully. You didn't hear? Zorian frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The Cult of the World Dragon issued a threat, well, technically a proclamation of intent but whatever, that they intend to summon an army of demons on the day of the summer festival. The planar convergence scheduled to occur on that day will be the most powerful one in centuries, so this is apparently a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them. You're serious? Ibri half asked, half stated. It's what they said, Zorian shrugged. And Cyoria has a lot of those crazies running around, so I think I'm justified in being a little concerned. Cyoria has a lot of dragon cultists? Bjorn asked incredulously. It's the hole, Ibri said with a sigh. It's something of a holy location for them, being a huge gaping hole in the ground of uncertain depth that continually spews mana into the air. They think it's a direct conduit to the heart of the world. Wow, good thing Ibri was here. Zorian didn't know that and would have had to make something up. He should probably read up on the cult's actual beliefs one of these days instead of simply thinking of them as a bunch of crazies. Know your enemy and all that. The conversation didn't linger on the cultists and their goals for long, and soon shifted to other topics. Zorian allowed it, not interested in pushing the issue. He had no idea if this exchange was going to have any sort of meaningful effect on the restart, but it cost him nothing to try and start the rumor mill a little early. The first domino was set. Break. Much like the last time Zorian had taken Kiriel to Cyoria, Byrne and Kiriel decided to tour the train station for a while before they moved on to the city proper. By that time, of course, it was heavily raining. Unlike last time, Zorian was now in possession of a warding necklace that he had made while waiting for the departure time in Siren, so keeping the rain barrier up around the group didn't strain his mana reserves in the slightest. Consequently, he decided to be nice and didn't argue at all when Kiriel insisted they accompany Byrne to the academy. That's probably why Byrne asked about keeping in touch when they reached his destination and were about to separate. Zorian gave him directions to Amaya's place and told him to drop by when he had the time. He was pretty sure Amaya wouldn't mind in the slightest, and, while Zorian himself didn't care much for the boy, he could see that Kiriel got along pretty well with the first year. And speaking of Amaya, their initial meeting went a lot better than it did last time. The fact they hadn't introduced themselves by frantically banging on the door and dragging water into the house probably helped with first impressions. Hell, she didn't even protest much when Zorian insisted he had something important to take care of and went out into the rain again. The important thing he had to do was speaking to the Urania to give them back their memories, but this time he bore additional gifts, 5 stone discs that acted as telepathic relays, drastically improving the ability of Urania to coordinate their actions across large distances. Naturally, the 6th disc remained in Zorian's possession, so he didn't have to descend into the sewers every time he wanted to speak with the matriarch. You know, when I told you to contact me as soon as possible, I didn't really mean you should call me in the middle of the freaking night, Zorian sent to the matriarch, putting as much of his annoyance and crankiness as he could manage into the message. He still wasn't very good at attaching emotions and images to his communication, but he was confident she would get the general picture of what he was trying to convey. I'm not sure about Urania, but we humans actually have to sleep during the night to function properly. My apologies, the matriarch sent back. She didn't sound sorry at all. It's a fascinating device you've gifted me with. Most impressive. Not really. It's pretty shoddy as far as magic items go. I took a lot of shortcuts in order to make so many, and it shows. It's a fairly large, heavy disc made out of solid stone, so not very inconspicuous or portable, and it has a lifespan of only 2.5 months. That's still a month and a half longer than needed, the matriarch remarked. True, Zorian agreed. I assume you can make long-lasting versions. Yes, of course, Zorian said. Could other artificers duplicate your work? She asked. Or is this something you came up with yourself? Zorian frowned. Why would she need other artificers when she had him? Did she plan to ditch him after they left the time loop or something? It's something I came up with, Zorian said. Other artificers would have to design a blueprint first. That could take a while. True, but misleading. He did design the relays on his own, basically from scratch, but it honestly hadn't been that difficult. He suspected any good magic item maker could design one within a month or two, provided they were either psychic themselves or had a psychic on hand for testing purposes. She could figure out that little detail on her own as far as he was concerned. I see, she said. Well, I guess I shouldn't keep you awake any longer. I just wanted to tell you I've reviewed the memory packet and am convinced it is genuine. Zorian rolled his eyes. As if there was any doubt. Apparently having gotten what she contacted him for, the matriarch cut the connection and left him alone in his bed again. Well, alone in his head at least, Kiriel was very much in the room with him, a fact she immediately reminded him of by taking advantage of his momentary distraction to appropriate the last bit of bed covering he had managed to keep away from her thus far. He gave her a nasty look for that, but she just snuggled deeper into her cocoon of stolen blankets, blissfully unaware of his ire in her realm of dreams. He sighed. There was no way he was going to be able to go back to sleep now. He quickly cast a silencing ward on the room and then slowly extricated himself from the bed, taking care not to wake up Kiriel. She was annoying, yes, but it wasn't her fault his sleep was ruined. Note to self, the next generation relay needs an off button. Break. After surprising Amaya by already being awake when she woke up, Zorian went out into the city to hit the stores. The plan he and the matriarch hashed out last restart involved creation of a lot of magic items on his part, and that meant buying material components and specialist tools. Not to mention that there were a few things he had to buy if he wanted to seriously start teaching Kiriel how to be a mage. He really hoped Kiriel charmed Kana in this restart like she had the last time around, while Zorian himself was decently skilled in alchemy and could manage on his own if he had to. Kale's help would be invaluable in some of the projects he had planned for this restart. Zorian. Over here. Zorian snapped out of his thoughts and quickly made way towards the person calling him. Benasek was exactly the person he was looking for. He quickly sat down next to the chubby boy and exchanged a bunch of pleasantries before getting to the reason he had tracked the boy down today. Ben, my friend, you won't believe what I found out during our school break, Zorian said. I still don't understand what they were thinking when they came up with that stuff. It's like something out of a bad adventure novel. Do tell, Benasek leaned forward. Well, Zorian began, suddenly feigning reluctance. It's kind of confidential, you know. I'm telling you this in strict confidence because we're friends, so don't go spreading this around, okay? Noting that he was about to tell him something confidential and warning him to keep it to himself was crucial, it meant Benasek was going to spread the story around twice as fast as he normally would. Of course, Benasek said pleasantly. You know me, Zorian. I would never betray your trust like that. Zorian couldn't help but smile. Thanks, Ben. I knew I could count on you. Break. Having told Benasek all about the nasty terrorist plot to bomb Cyoria during the summer festival, Zorian went back to Amaya's place to wait for Taven and her offer of joining the sewer run. He amused himself by creating one of those practice cards that Svim had him hone his shaping skills on. He had planned to simply buy a stack of them from one of the stores he visited this morning, but they were a lot more expensive than he had figured they would be. His respect for Svim rose slightly when he realized how much money Svim effectively spent on his training during that restart. Zorian's list of complaints about the man was several pages long, but it seemed that being cheap wasn't among them. He was still impressing Ilsa into taking him on as her apprentice, of course. Cheap or not cheap, the man was incredibly frustrating and only tolerable in small doses. He finished painting the glyphs on the corners of the card he was making and started binding the necessary spell combination. Kiriel, who was in the process of drawing a nearby vase of flowers, briefly looked up from her sheet of paper when she noticed him casting spells, but quickly went back to her work when she saw the lack of light shows or other impressive visual effects. He hoped that Benasek would keep silent about the source of the rumor Zorian had told him. He probably would. Ben never revealed his sources if he could help it, since he liked to pretend he had some super secret sources to draw information from rather than just spreading rumors from his fellow students. But Zorian had a contingency plan to follow even if someone with official authority came to confront him about the story. The fact that the Arania were currently spreading the same story in several different places should also help mask where exactly the whole thing had originated in the first place. He was just putting the finishing touches on the card when Taven burst into the kitchen and locked onto his position. Hey, Roach, nice place you got here, she said, plopping down to a seat next to him and peering closer to look at his work.
Oh.
I know what that is. I've been meaning to get some one of these days, but I always end up spending my money elsewhere. How many did you buy? None, Zorian said. They were too expensive for my taste, so I decided to make my own. This is the only one I made so far. Taven raised her eyebrow at him, looking amused at his claim. Zorian frowned, not liking the expression. She didn't believe he could make a card like this. This was nothing. He thrust the finished card into her face with a scowl. Try it out, he told her. Sighing dramatically, Taven took a deep breath and frowned. Zorian felt a mixture of surprise and frustration burst from her and realized she had tried to burn the circle he drew onto the card and failed. You couldn't do it, could you? Zorian grinned. You made it wrong, she huffed. Did not. Zorian protested. You just suck. Do not, she shot back. Why don't you do it if you're so special, huh? Humph, Zorian scoffed, snatching the card back. He positioned the card so that she could see the results of what he was about to do, and in the back of his mind he noted that Kiriel had decided to see what the fuss was all about and was studying the card as well, and then flashed his mana into the card in a practiced manner. The circle, and only the circle, momentarily shone red from the heat before collapsing into ash. Zorian blew a gust of air into the hole to scatter the remains across the table and then smugly handed the spent card to Taven. He crossed his arms and waited for her reply. Ahem, a mature female voice interrupted the scene from behind him. You will, of course, clean up this mess you've made on my table, won't you, Mr. Kaczynski? Oh, and I would like to warn you that I will bill you for any property damage you inflict on my material possessions with your experiments. Zorian turned and gave Amaya a big, friendly smile. She rolled her eyes at him and gestured towards the ashes on the table. Hanging his head in defeat, Zorian went to get a rag from the bathroom, ignoring Taven's soft laughter behind him. Just for that he was tempted to blow her off when she asked him to accompany her to the sewers. Briefly. The fact was, he definitely needed to go with her this time. So what was it that you needed from me anyway? Zorian asked, sitting down next to Taven again. Well, I was wondering if you'd join me on a little expedition. Zorian patiently listened to her explanation before revealing he had contacts with the Arania and requesting that they try talking to them first before barging in, spells blazing. Much like in previous restarts where he had brought the issue up, Taven accepted him hanging out with giant sewer-dwelling spiders easily enough, but this time she also had an additional request. Since you apparently think you're good enough to walk around the dungeon all by your lonesome, meeting sentient monsters and gods know what else, I would like to test your skills a little, Taven told him. Plus, it doesn't hurt to know what your actual combat skills are if you're going to accompany me and my team into a potentially dangerous situation. You do know some combat skills, don't you? Plenty, Zorian assured her. Good, so come to my place tomorrow at noon so I can test you, Taven said. You're sure they're going to hand us the clock if we ask nicely? If they have it, said Zorian. That guy who gave you the job doesn't sound all that reliable to me. I don't believe for a second that he didn't know what the Arania are, yet he still sent you go get a pocket watch from them. Either he's trying to get you all killed or, hell, I don't know what his game is there. If the watch is something very valuable or very illegal, he might not want to send someone who could recognize what they are holding, Taven frowned. Just how dangerous are these spiders of yours? I mean, even if sentient, they're still bound to be vulnerable to burning and such. Maybe he thought we would just bulldoze through them without talking? Arania are all mages, Zorian said. It wasn't strictly true, as only a small minority of Arania was armed with a true spellcasting system, but psychic powers were versatile enough to count as a sort of specialized spellcasting system. They are especially fond of mind magic, illusions, and stealth. And they have a telepathic link to one another, so they will know and remember you if you massacre some of their outposts, And then you'd have a bunch of magical spiders with a grudge looking to ambush you or lure you into a trap the next time you descend into the dungeon. Shit, Taven said. He felt a spike of anger from her before she reined it in and forced herself to calm down. That asshole better have been ignorant of the danger, or I'm reporting him to the nearest police station I find. That's practically a murder attempt. Let's talk to the Arania first and see what they have to say, Zorian quickly said. He didn't want Taven to confront the man and then cancel the whole thing. I guarantee they won't attack you so long as you have me with you. Taven gave him a long, unreadable look. What? He asked. Nothing, Taven said. It's just that. I thought I knew you, but now it turns out you have this whole secret life I've never known about until now. It's a bit unreal.
Yeah,
Kiriel suddenly piped in. She had been silent throughout their discussion, but apparently she had been listening to everything with rapt attention. How come you never told your own sister any of this? Oh, that one is easy, Zorian replied smoothly. I didn't want mother and father to find out, so telling you would have been foolish. Do you have any idea how many times you've gotten me in trouble by spilling my secrets in front of our parents? Oh, come on. Kiriel whined. I was a little baby. I didn't know anything. You can't possibly still be angry about that? No, of course not, Zorian mumbled uncomfortably. I did just tell Taven about the Arania right in front of you, didn't I? Taven shook her head sadly, rising from her seat. You keep too many secrets, Roach. I feel a little hurt that you felt you couldn't confide in me, but I was never one to hold a grudge, so I'll let it go. Just don't expect this to be the end of it. I'm going to pester you endlessly until I get the whole story. See you tomorrow. Wait, Zorian said. Actually.
Yeah.
There is something I need to tell you. All of you. Miss Karashka, I know you've been eavesdropping on us for a while now, so you might as well sit down for this. Amaya whirled around from where she was fiddling with the cutlery and placed her hands on her hips, giving him an angry look. I was not doing any such thing, she told him. I was simply minding my own business, and in my own kitchen no less. If you didn't want me overhearing your conversation, you should have taken it elsewhere. My mistake, Zorian agreed easily. He was pretty sure she had finished whatever she had come into the kitchen to do for a while now and was simply hanging around to hear them talk, but whatever. Kiri, do you remember how I promised to teach you spellcasting in exchange for a favor back in the train?
Yeah.
Kiriel confirmed hesitantly. Right, a little background first. I am what is commonly known as an empath, a person who can sense other people's emotions. Unfortunately, up until recently, my powers have been kind of running amok. There was nobody I could turn to for help, at least not on the human side of things. The spiders, Amaya surmised. Yes, Zorian agreed. Arania are all empathic as part of their innate nature. Thanks to them, I now have more or less gained control over my empathic abilities, though it will take years of practice to truly refine them into something reliable. Follow me so far? What am I feeling right now? Kiriel asked. I actually don't know, Zorian admitted. People's feelings are rarely very simple, and unless they are feeling one emotion very strongly, I'm reduced to educated guesses based on my previous interactions with the person. The more time I spend around someone, the easier I can read them. But isn't she your sister? Amaya asked. You'd think that if anyone was familiar enough for your ability to work, it would be family. Our family is, Zorian hesitated, searching for a proper word. Slightly dysfunctional, I guess. I try to stay away from them most of the time, so I haven't interacted with Kiriel all that often. And I'm not the only one keeping secrets around here. Kiriel is also keeping a lot of things close to her chest. I guess we don't really know each other all that well, sibling bonds notwithstanding. There was a brief silence as everyone involved digested that admission, but the awkward atmosphere was quickly broken by Amaya clearing her throat. "Well," she said. "I guess it's a good thing you're both here now to reconnect."
Yeah.
Kiriel immediately agreed. "Hey, do you think I could be an empath too?" "Sorry, Kiri, but I'm pretty sure you aren't," Zorian said. "I would have been able to sense it if you were." "You can sense other empaths?" Taven asked. "I can sense all minds around me, empath or otherwise," Zorian said. "I also get some basic information about each mind, how complex their thoughts are, their species, their gender, stuff like that. Empaths light up like little suns on my mind sense, so, sorry, Kiri." "It's fine," she said dejectedly. "You can sense people all around you, regardless of obstacles?" Taven asked. Zorian nodded. "And the range on that ability is?" "If I'm busy with something else and just running my mind's sense in the background?" "About 10 meters, said Zorian. "If I'm specifically concentrating on scanning the environment?" "Easily 10 times that. However, if there are a lot of minds around me, I have trouble processing the information and they all sort of start to blend together in a confusing, headache-inducing mass. I mostly just shut my empathy off when I'm around big crowds." "Roach, I am so recruiting you for my team," Taven said. "I've been trying to find a tracker for my team for a while now. Now all we need is to teach you some divination spells and dash." "Already done, thank you," Zorian said. "I am quite proficient in divination." "Even better," Taven said. "You're hired." "We'll see," Zorian sighed. "Fascinating," Amaya said. "I've never heard of that aspect of empathy, though I guess it makes sense that someone who can sense emotions can locate other people through it. But that's not what you wanted to talk about, is it?" "No, it's not," Zorian nodded. "It's not common knowledge, but empathy is just an initial expression of a much more dangerous ability. A sufficiently skilled empath can bridge the gap between minds and connect with any person in range in order to talk to them telepathically, read their thoughts, fool their senses or mess with their memories. And Arania have been teaching me how to do that." He paused to gauge their reactions. Well, none of them were quietly panicking or burning with outrage, so that was encouraging. "I have no intention of doing that to any of you without permission," Zorian said. "But at the same time I need someone to practice on. The Arania aren't very suitable for this, their minds are too alien for a beginner like me to understand. I need a human volunteer, and I'm hoping for you to help me out, oh sister of mine." "You want to read my mind?" Kiriel asked. "To put it bluntly, yes," Zorian said. "And if I say no, will you still teach me magic?" "Absolutely," Zorian said. "It's a request, not blackmail. I'll just have to find someone else to help me if you refuse." "Well, okay," she said. "I guess I'll help you. But you can't talk to anyone about the stuff in my head. And you have to tell me all about your secrets in exchange." "Sure," Zorian smiled. "Sounds like a fair deal to me." Break. The whole confrontation went off surprisingly well, Zorian reflected. Sure, Amaya had been avoiding him ever since and Kiriel was giving him these weird looks, but none of them were terrified of him or anything, just mildly uncomfortable. They were taking the revelation much better than he had predicted they would. And then, of course, was Taven, who was apparently not bothered at all by his admission that he was learning how to read people's thoughts. "You ready, Roach?" she asked, twirling her combat staff in her hand. "I'm ready."
Yeah.
Zorian said, gripping his spell rod tighter. If he knew anything about how Taven thought, and he did, she would immediately go on the offensive. Her battle philosophy basically boiled down to attack hard and you won't have to defend to begin with, though she could defend too, if pressed. He had no way to win a protracted fight with her, even if he was technically a better mage than she was, so he would have to resort to trickery if he wanted to prevail here. It would be nice if he could eke out a win against her. Her face when she lost against little old Roach was bound to be absolutely glorious to behold. A blink and suddenly there were 5 magic missiles homing in on him. He let them crash uselessly against his shield and responded with a somewhat exotic electrical spell. A beam of electricity shot towards Taven, who erected a basic shield of her own to tank it. Halfway towards its target, the beam split into 3 smaller beams, one pivoted to the left of Taven, the other to the right, and the third one straight above it. And then they all changed their paths again and crashed against her from 3 different directions, completely bypassing the shield in front of her. It wasn't enough. Somehow, Taven managed to smoothly transition from a single direction shield to a full aegis before the beams managed to reach her. Zorian threw a couple of smoke bombs around the training hall to blind her, relying on his mind sense to tell him where she was, and started casting a complicated spell that wasn't etched into his spell rod the moment his location got obscured by the smoke. Taven responded by casting several gusts of wind to disperse the smoke and hopefully catch him in the area of effect as well. She had just about stripped him of his smokescreen when he finished the spell and felt his mana reserves drain almost completely dry. If this doesn't work, then that's it for this fight, he thought. A bright beam of concentrated force shot out from his hand and slammed into Taven's shield. The shield flared at the point of impact, shattering almost instantly, and Taven was lifted off her feet by the impact and thrown violently against the floor. She didn't get up, rendered unconscious by the impact. "Oops," Zorian said quietly. "I think I overdid it just a little. That could have easily killed her if the wards hadn't worked properly." After casting a few divinations to make sure she was mostly okay, and not bleeding internally or something like that, Zorian allowed himself to smile. He would have to work on his restraint, but it was a victory. And she hadn't been any gentler towards him in their previous fights, so she hardly had any right to complain about excessive force. He couldn't wait to see Taven's face when she woke up. "Break. Come on, Roach," Taven growled. "Find those spiders of yours so we can be done with this mission. I'm getting sick of this place already." Zorian sighed and refocused on scanning his surroundings. This would be going faster if Taven stopped snapping at him every so often. Talk about being a sore loser. "Hey," a male voice whispered into Zorian's ear, breaking him out of thoughts. "What happened between you and Taven to get her so bothered, anyway?" Zorian glanced at Grunt and considered how to answer for a second. He decided to be blunt and truthful. "I beat her in a spar," he said. "She thinks I cheated." Grunt gave him a considering look. "You beat Taven in a spar? Aren't you a 3rd year?" "Sure am," Zorian agreed, before he noticed a familiar presence on his mental map. "Oh hey, there they are." After the initial introductions were done, Taven immediately moved on to the reason they were down in the tunnels in the first place, only to get disappointed. "So you don't have the watch?" Taven asked. "Alas, I'm afraid the next group of attackers managed to break into our treasury and escaped with a great many of our artifacts, the watch we claimed from the thief being among them," the matriarch said regretfully. "I do know where their base is, however." This was all a bunch of bullshit, Zorian knew. The watch was indeed somewhere else, specifically in one of the forward outposts that the invaders used to launch attacks on the Urania, but it was there because the Urania had put it there. The idea was for Taven and her group to stumble onto the outpost, realize they're stumbled onto something big, bigger than they could handle, and then report it to the authorities. It was Zorian's job to make sure Taven and her group survived the encounter with the invaders. How convenient, Zorian scoffed, that getting the watch involves taking out one of your enemies in the process. "A happy coincidence," the matriarch said easily. "We both get something out of it. After all, you get the location of the watch for free, and I get to deal with one of my problems without risking my web. Now, do you want the location of the base or not? Just who are these enemies of yours, anyway? Taven asked. I don't know exactly, the matriarch said. The attackers consisted of a mage controlling 2 war trolls, but the base is guaranteed to have more forces than that. War trolls. Taven blanched. Hell, that is way more than we signed up for. The guy is definitely not paying us enough to confront a couple of war trolls with mage support, Mumble said quietly. Maybe check it out anyway? Zorian tried. Like, from a distance? I may be able to tell how many forces there are in the place.
Yeah.
Taven said after considering things for a few moments.
Yeah.
We should check it out at least. No offense to the matriarch here, but a bunch of guys running around the sewers with tamed war trolls sounds a bit implausible. Maybe she saw something else. I suppose it's possible, the matriarch allowed. I haven't actually seen trolls before, and wasn't personally present when the incident occurred, but they sounded very much like the trolls humans speak of. Right, Taven nodded. Where did you say this base was again? Break. The base wasn't actually in the city sewers. That part of the dungeon was somewhat patrolled and monitored, and it would have been impossible to hide a large mass of soldiers there for an appreciable length of time. For that matter, the Arania didn't actually live in the sewers either, although they considered them part of their territory. Instead, both the Iranian home base and the various invader outposts were situated in what was known to Cyoria authorities as the intermediary layer. It was not particularly rare for mages to descend into the intermediary layer, but it was not a common occurrence either. The intermediary layer was too dangerous for a casual stroll by an unarmed civilian, but mostly devoid of anything valuable that would attract dungeon delvers and other adventurers. The city hired mercenaries to sweep through the place every few years and get rid of any obvious threats that had set up residence, and they usually also picked the place clean of anything valuable, leaving a great expanse of little value. For those who wanted to challenge themselves against the denizens of the underworld and search the place for riches, there was the hole and its direct access to deeper levels that hadn't been picked clean over the decades. Most of the visitors from the city consisted of an occasional thrill-seeking student and an occasional patrol to keep an eye on things. The invaders chose the timing of their invasion well. The city was so focused on the summer festival and its associated problems that it didn't pay attention to what was happening in the dungeon at all. This would normally not be such a problem, as very few problems could spring out of nothing in a couple of measly months, especially with little to no indication that something big was happening, but now. Holy shit, Taven whispered, peering from behind their cover to look at the camp again. They've got a freaking army there. Get down, you idiot, Grunt growled at her, pulling her down behind the rock they were using as cover. Do you want them to see you? If they notice us, we're dead. There must be at least 100 trolls down there and at least 20 handlers. Sorry, Taven said. It's just so unreal. Zorian had to agree. He was expecting it, and he was still surprised at the scale of what they were seeing. Then again, this was why the matriarch had chosen this particular base out of the 12 or so she knew of. The others were smaller and much better hidden, but this particular base was situated in a large open cavern and had enough artificial illumination that a human observer could see the whole camp easily from a sufficiently high vantage, like the one they were using, for example. In fact, the vantage point they were using was pretty much perfect for observing the camp. I wonder. He silently ran his fingers against the walls of the tunnel that brought them here. It was bumpy but smooth. Far too smooth to be natural. The rock they were hiding behind was the same. Apparently this was even more of a setup than I thought it was, Zorian thought. I bet one of the Iranian mages made this tunnel specifically so we could find it. It would explain why no one seemed to be paying any attention to this particular entrance. Even though the other two are both guarded, they don't even know it exists. Well, whatever, time to do his part in this charade. He pulled out a mirror from his backpack and silently cast a scrying spell on it. The base had a divination ward, of course, but it was based on the idea of stopping people from realizing that the base was there to begin with. Since Zorian knew that the camp existed and where it was, and was in fact right next to it, the entire ward was pretty much useless against him. After 5 minutes of watching the camp through the mirror, Taven decided she had seen enough and motioned him to cancel the spell. "Let's go," she said. "I want to get out of here before our luck runs out." They almost made it out without complications. Almost. As the four of them approached one of the seals between the sewers and the deeper layers of the dungeon, they suddenly came face to face with a duo of hooded mages flanked by 4 trolls. For a moment, both groups halted and tried to make sense of what they were seeing, neither group really expecting to stumble upon each other. Zorian noted with annoyance that their mental presence was somehow muted, no doubt a countermeasure against the Arania, and cursed himself for thinking that his opponents wouldn't have some way of dealing with mind sense. The impasse was broken when one of the mages ordered the trolls to charge. Neither Taven nor her 2 teammates hesitated when faced with 4 war trolls charging at them, raising their staffs to blast the attackers before they could overrun them. Zorian decided to keep the mages busy instead and fired a small missile swarm of 4 piercers, 2 for each mage. Several things happened simultaneously. One of the mages dropped whatever spell he was casting and raised a shield to successfully tank the missiles coming towards him. The other was less skilled and fumbled his shield, both piercers hit him straight in the chest and he went down in a shower of blood. Grunt and Mumble used quick flamethrowers to halt the charge of the trolls, but while 3 of the trolls did flinch away from the flames, the largest, best-armored troll lurched forward, a little dazed but unharmed. Taven hit them all with a battering ram of force, intending to knock the whole group down and give them some space, and for the most part succeeded. The 3 recovering trolls and the surviving mage were hurled deeper into the tunnel and away from them, but that one troll at the front kept its ground. It raised its huge iron mace for an overhead strike and screamed out a challenge, its shout staggering them like a physical blow, acting almost like a lesser version of the battering ram that Taven just cast. Strange, Zorian had always thought trolls had no magic other than their absurd regenerative capabilities. He had no time to consider this, however, as the troll immediately capitalized on the distraction it caused and surged forward. Frantically, Zorian erected a large shield in front of the group, trying to buy time. Sadly, unlike the other trolls Zorian had battled in the previous restarts, this one was too smart to just crash into the shield. It smashed its mace into the shield with great force, once, twice, 3 times. The shield broke and the troll kicked him in the chest, catapulting him backwards where he collided with Grunt and Mumble and interrupted whatever they were about to cast. Taven, on the other hand, managed to finish hers. A vortex of fire surged forward, finishing off the surviving mage and the 3 other trolls that were moving to aid their comrade but leaving the lead troll merely singed. And very, very angry. "Shit," Taven said quietly, as the troll raised its mace for a killing strike. Even though he knew her death wouldn't be permanent, even though he had known there was a chance for this to happen when he had agreed to participate in this plan, Zorian found himself completely horrified at the idea of watching Taven get crushed to death. Killed because of him and his plots and schemes. He reached out to the troll's mind and noticed it was no longer being muted. While Taven's spell failed to incinerate the troll, it seemed to have burned out whatever protected it from mind magic. Rather than try any sort of sophisticated attack, he simply flooded it with meaningless drivel, blasting its mind with random telepathy. The troll flinched in shock and spasmed, halting its attack and dropping the mace it was holding. Zorian immediately threw 2 explosive cubes at its feet. "Taven, get back." She didn't have to be told twice, immediately snapping out of her daze and scrambling backwards out of the troll's reach. Zorian activated the bombs as soon as he judged her out of reach, and the troll was enveloped in a deafening explosion. Somehow, it still survived. It was kneeling and clutching its leg in pain, and bleeding all over, but Zorian could already see its flesh knitting together. Damn it, what was it with this one troll? Was it a super troll or something? And then 2 ice blue beams impacted directly into the troll's chest, courtesy of Grunt and Mumble, and the creature immediately froze over and went still. Is it finally dead? He asked. I don't know and don't care, Taven said. Let's get lost before we meet another one. Zorian took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded in assent. Then he tried to take a step and winced at the pain in his leg. He could walk, but he just knew he was going to be hurting for the rest of the week. This better be worth it, you damn manipulative spider, he inwardly thought. Break. So it's all done, the matriarch asked. Zorian gripped the stone disc in his hand tighter. Yes. I just said so, didn't I? Thankfully, there were no actual casualties, though it was close. In many ways our close brush with death works in favor of your plan, since Taven is really pissed about these people now and determined to bring them to justice. She is going to report the whole thing tomorrow to the city authorities. I sincerely hope it wasn't you who arranged for us to stumble onto that group, Miss Spear of Resolve, or I'll be very angry at you. Don't worry, I had nothing to do with it, the matriarch assured him. Right, Zorian sighed. Maybe he was being paranoid, but the matriarch's behavior had grown ever more secretive over the past few restarts, and he wouldn't put it past her to pull something like that. How about you? Is your task done? Yes, the matriarch confirmed. I have contacted Zack and told him that the Arania are aware of the time loop.